self. Is that pretty clear? And then what happens, of course, is as self, even as self takes one small step in that direction of self-love and self-acceptance, invariably the magnetics are such that in come the people, perhaps one person, perhaps one being, maybe a pet, a puppy, a kitten, a llama, what have you, comes in and shows a moment of love and tenderness to self. And then a person comes in and shows a moment of love and tenderness to self. And then self begins to say, oh goodness, this distortion, this illusion of utter isolation at this deep level, it is time to release it. So that self can realize that the more that self feels love for self, that self becomes like a magnet for people. Is that very clear? Self need not unconsciously hire them to reject self. Self need not try to fit in or connect with others who perhaps are in a different field of resonance. Rather, self's kindred spirits, self's beloveds, circle around self and hold self for eternity. There are soul groups, so they're not. There are soul families. There are soul cadres, so to speak. Is that part clear? These groups are long-lasting, dare we say. Self comes from the etheric planes, being held within these groups of kindred spirits. They have agreed to incarnate, usually more or less around the same time. Not all of them, and yet enough of them. So self is, dare we say, never put on the planet without others who resonate with self, who see self, who love self. Is that very clear? Yes? Next question.
How do I work with or transform my inner critic, which is at work over time in my life?
It is rather interesting, the role of the inner critic. Does anyone know what the role is?
Saboteur.
Indeed. And what does it sabotage in self?
One's truth and one's essence.
What was it?
One's truth and one's essence.
Indeed. Indeed. And how does it do that?
You need to work hard to get love.
Yes. That is one false belief. Put it into the cauldron. Yes. Perhaps it tries to convince self that self isn't quite there yet. Does anyone ever think that they're already there or they're not quite there yet? Everyone is already there, here and everywhere. Never clear.
Not even close.
Goodness. And so the critic comes in, does it not? And it presents as a respectable, upstanding citizen of the universe. Usually the teacher with the ruler or something. And it says, we know what's best for you. And if you do what we say, someday, if you're lucky, you'll arrive. Oh goodness. And we have a long list for self to work on. And the list keeps regenerating itself, does it not? For eternity. That's quite clear. Because there is always some flaw in there, is there not? There is something that's not quite right with self. Is that quite clear? And self better make that one little tiny spot everything. Is that quite clear? In other words, that one tiny little flaw has to be the be-all, end-all of self's purpose to address that flaw. So what happens? The critic starts to gain tremendous power in the psyche, does it not? Because it, once again, it hypnotizes self, it entrains self to keep looking at all of the supposed flaws, all of the shortcomings, not within an aura of love, and let's explore this, with an aura of not enoughness, strictness, shame, shame, shame on you for being a human being. Is everyone here willing to release that voice right now?
Yes.
Indeed.
I am.
Oh, goodness. Yes. Yes. And so it is most important, because the critic feeds on shame, does it not? Humankind walks around enshrouded in a covering, a blanket of shame. Shame of what? The Garden of Eden? Adam and Eve? An apple? A snake? What? What is the shame? Yes, we play. Why do we play? To shake loose some of the seriousness. Yes? There is nothing to be ashamed about. There is no thought. There is no feeling. There is no action that requires shame. Is that part clear?
Yes.
There are many students that say, well, if we went out and did a horrible crime, that's a shameful thing. If self went out to do a horrible crime and did a horrible crime, self has an opportunity to learn from that. Self has an opportunity to transform that, to work with whatever distortion brought self to that place. Bringing shame to self does nothing except exacerbate the original wound that instigated the crime to begin with. Is that part clear? So therefore, shaming, rather than correcting an imbalance in the psyche, increases it, augments the imbalance. Is that part clear?
Yeah.
The critic loves to shame self. Does everyone notice that? And in doing that, then there is that level of self-betrayal. And yet it is dressed up as respectable, is it not? Because if self were to truly cut loose, would self be too wild without that critic? We are addressing the one who asked the question.
That was me. The question again.
Would there be too much wildness?
Yeah, I don't even know, because it's so powerful.
It is so powerful, yes. Usually, everyone here, though, faces the same question, yes? Does everyone here have a critic?
Yes.
Does the critic shame self?
Yes.
All right. The critic, therefore, is trying to put a lid on an aspect of self and push it down. And it gathers tremendous energy in doing so, does it not? And it brainwashes self, or shall we say, it brings out the brainwashing that has already been put into place. Yes, by parents and society, etc. And yet this brainwashing, this belief system is inherent in the causal body of the soul. It has been around for many, many incarnations. And this brainwashing usually says, whatever it is about self, it is not right. It is not okay. And therefore, self has to fix it. So humankind assumes that it was brought onto the planet to fix itself. Oh goodness. How can it fix what it is? It can love what it is, which does what? Evolves it, yes? Softens it, yes? Illuminates it, yes? When it tries to fix it, it is trying to chop it up into pieces. Is that part clear? And therefore, this critic loves to do that. So it is rather interesting. What would it be like for self to go through an entire week ignoring the critic?
Impossible.
What else?
Impossible.
Impossible. What makes it impossible?
Habit.
What was that? Habit?
Habit.
Yes. So self is saying that habit is impossible to break?
Maybe.
Oh goodness.
What about becoming ostracized?
If self doesn't listen to the critic?
Yeah, if you just got carried away with wildness.
Oh goodness. Self can be wild without getting carried away by it. Is that part clear?
What's a good replacement for the critic?
Love? If self goes up to a child and says, all right, child, you have done this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong. I want you to fix it. Go to your room and think about it and fix it. Otherwise, we'll fix you. Or someone goes to the child and says, we love you. Let us help you learn about yourself and how you can grow and grow and grow and become more than ever who you are. What are the effects of it too?
The second of the
Indeed. Yes. Does the child need to go wild? No. Does the critic and the shamey ensure that the child won't go wild? No. As a matter of fact, they'll usually ensure that it does go wild. Is that part clear? So perhaps there is nothing to fear when self unleashes self's nature. And that self's nature will unfold the path. And the path will fulfill self's destiny. If self criticizes self's nature and tries to fix it through shaming, that is a form of self-betrayal, because self is trying to fit self into some other notion of who self should be. A notion that self learned along the way. Childhood, past lives, monadic level, what have you. Is that part clear? And then that becomes, once again, the betrayer is trying to help self by fitting self into something, some notion, template, some template of what self is supposed to be. And so it is an act of self-love twisted into self-betrayal. Is that part clear? And therefore it is important to go to the root, and to ask, what is this thing that self is supposed to be that the critic keeps saying? Be this, do this, be this, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And then self will perhaps discover a template that was handed to self.